There is a moment that happens after you have been gone long enough, after the silence has extended past what the avoidant expected, after the decompression they initially felt has run its course, and the flatness has arrived, and the specific and located quality of your absence has become something they can no longer file away cleanly. There is a moment where the regret becomes undeniable, where what they pushed away or allowed to drift or failed to show up for crystallizes into something they can finally see in its full weight. And in that moment, something shifts in them. The architecture that maintained the distance with such apparent ease begins to reveal its cost. The self-sufficiency that looked like freedom starts to feel like its other name. The quiet they chose starts to have a specific texture, your texture, the particular shape of what is missing rather than the general comfort of space. That moment is real, the regret in it is genuine, and understanding what it actually contains, what it is made of, and what it is not made of, is the most important thing you can know if that regret ever finds its way back to you in the form of a return. The regret the avoidant feels after losing someone genuinely significant is not simple. It is not the clean, uncomplicated recognition of having made a mistake and wanting to correct it. It is layered in ways that matter enormously for what the regret actually means and what it is likely to produce. The outermost layer is the awareness of absence, the specific and persistent experience of something missing that was present before. Not missing in the abstract, missing in the particular. The way certain moments have a quality that belongs to your presence and do not have it without you. The automatic reaching toward you that finds nothing. The experiences that would have been fuller, conversations that would have gone further, silences that would have felt different. This layer is genuine. It is the attachment system doing its honest work, reporting accurately on what the removal of a significant presence produces. And it is also, on its own, insufficient as a basis for the conclusion that the return would be different from the original. Because underneath the awareness of absence is something the avoidant is less likely to have done the work of examining. The question of their own role. Not the loss itself, their contribution to it. The specific choices made from fear rather than from the truth of what they felt. The withdrawals that were driven by the pattern rather than by genuine assessment of whether the connection was worth preserving. The distance that was maintained past the point where it served anything real. The regret that has reached this layer, the regret that has moved from awareness of absence into honest reckoning with contribution, is qualitatively different from the regret that has not. It has done something with itself rather than simply sitting in the discomfort of missing you. It has turned toward the harder examination rather than stopping at the easier one. And the difference between those two kinds of regret is the most important distinction you will ever make if they return. Now I want to talk about what access means, because the title of this conversation uses that word deliberately, and it deserves examination. When the avoidant had access to you, they had access to something specific, not just your company, not just the relationship in the general sense, the particular quality of your presence, the specific way you held their complexity without requiring it to resolve, the nervous system regulation your genuine settledness created in their vicinity, the understanding that did not become demand, the warmth that did not arrive with an invoice. These things are not nothing, they are in fact rare, and their rarity is part of what makes the regret as significant as it is. The avoidant is not regretting a generic loss. They are regretting the loss of something specific that your particular person provided and that the world has not readily replaced. But here is what matters about this. The regret organized around losing access to what you provided is a different thing from the regret organized around losing you as a person they want to meet differently, around wanting to show up differently for who you are, rather than wanting to restore the access to what you gave. One of those is about them and what they lost. The other is about you and what you deserve. And the avoidant, in the early stages of the regret, is not always clearly in one place or the other. The two can coexist, can feel the same from the inside, can produce the same reaching across the silence. Only what happens over time, and particularly over time in the specific circumstances that previously produced the withdrawal, reveals which one is actually driving the return. There is something that happens in the avoidant when the regret reaches a certain weight. Something I want to describe carefully because it is frequently misread by the people on the receiving end of it. The avoidant begins to rewrite the relationship in memory, not dishonestly, not with conscious revision, but with the specific selective emphasis that loss produces in everyone. The moments that were genuinely good become luminous in retrospect. The connection that existed at its best becomes the primary texture of the remembered relationship. The difficulty, the withdrawal, the cost the dynamic produced for you recedes, not because they are indifferent to it, because the grief of loss naturally emphasizes what was good and minimizes what was hard. This memory revision produces a version of the relationship that is more positive than the full and honest account would be, and it produces, in the avoidant, a wanting back that is partly organized around returning to that luminous remembered version, rather than around returning to the full and complicated reality of what the relationship actually was. This is important for you to understand because when the return happens, if it happens, the avoidant is partly seeking the luminous memory rather than the full reality. And the full reality, which includes the pattern and the cost and the specific ways the dynamic required you to be less than you are, is what would actually be returned to. The luminous memory and the full reality are not the same thing, and you have the advantage of remembering both. Do not let them come back is advice that sounds simple and contains a genuine complexity I want to honor rather than flatten. Because the honest version of it is not a categorical rule. It is a standard, a specific and demanding standard for what the return would need to demonstrate before it constituted something worth opening to. What would need to be different, not in the abstract, in the specific and concrete terms of what the pattern previously produced, and what would need to have changed for the return to represent something other than the same pattern restarted with more emotional intensity. What behavioral evidence, demonstrated across what amount of time, in what specific circumstances, would constitute the demonstration that the regret did something, that it produced genuine engagement with the patterns rather than just the discomfort of missing you? Those are demanding questions. They are more demanding than simply closing the door, and they are more honest than a categorical rule applied without reference to what this specific person, at this specific point in their development, is actually bringing back. Because the door being closed forever protects you from the repetition, and it also closes you to the possibility that the person returning is genuinely different from the person who left, that the time apart did what time sometimes does, that the regret reached deep enough to produce something real. Both of those outcomes are possible, and only honest, patient, behavioral evidence over time can tell you which one you are actually looking at. The standard is not whether the regret is genuine, it is. The standard is not whether the missing is real, it is. The standard is what the regret produced in them beyond the feeling of it. That standard is yours to set, from your honest knowledge of what the relationship cost, from your honest assessment of what your life requires now, from the specific and hard-won clarity of someone who invested significantly and paid the full emotional tax and knows, more precisely than anyone else, what the return would need to bring in order to be worth the reopening. Set it from that place, not from the relief of the return, not from the pull of the familiar, not from the hope that the regret itself is the change, from the honest ground of what you actually know. That ground is solid. You built it yourself, in the time they were gone, and it is the most reliable thing you have for whatever comes next. When someone returns after having left, or having slowly made leaving inevitable through the accumulation of distance, there is a specific pull that the return creates, a pull that is worth understanding clearly before responding to it. The pull is not primarily about love. It is about familiarity, about the nervous system recognizing someone it knows deeply, about the specific relief of reconnection with someone whose presence, however complicated the history, feels known in a way that new connections do not yet feel known, about the particular warmth of being wanted by someone whose wanting you have been uncertain of. These are real feelings. They are not evidence of anything beyond themselves. They are the nervous system responding to the return of something familiar, and familiarity, after significant loss, feels like home, even when home was where the cost was highest. This is the first thing to hold clearly when the return happens. The pull toward it is not confirmation that the return is right. It is confirmation that the attachment was real. Those are different things. There is a specific question worth sitting with when the avoidant comes back. Not asking them, sitting with yourself, in the honest quiet of your own assessment, rather than in the warmth of the reconnection. What did the time apart cost them? Not in the sentimental sense of, did they miss you? You already know the answer to that is yes in some form. In the more demanding sense of what did the missing require of them? Whether the discomfort of your absence produced anything beyond the discomfort itself. Whether they used the time to look honestly at what the pattern cost both of you. Whether they sought any form of genuine engagement with what drives the withdrawal. Whether anything in them is actually different, or whether the primary change is that the decompression ended and the attachment reasserted itself, and the return is the natural output of the missing becoming louder than the management strategies. That last possibility is the most common one, and it produces a return that feels genuine because it is genuine in its feeling, while being insufficient in what it brings. The avoidant who returns because the missing became unbearable is the same avoidant who left because the closeness became overwhelming. The same nervous system, the same architecture, the same patterns waiting to reassert themselves once the closeness rebuilds to the level that previously triggered the withdrawal. Genuine feeling is not the same as genuine change, and the return deserves to be assessed on the basis of change rather than on the basis of feeling. Here is what genuine change looks like when it is present, not as a checklist, as a quality that reveals itself through specific and observable things. The avoidant who has done genuine work during the time apart arrives differently than the one who has simply missed you. The difference is not in the warmth, which is present in both. It is in the quality of honesty available in the reconnection, the capacity to acknowledge, specifically and without excessive deflection, what their patterns produced, not a performance of accountability, the actual, slightly uncomfortable, not entirely graceful recognition of their own contribution to what happened. They do not need to have perfect language for it. They do not need to have processed everything cleanly. But there is something present in the return of someone who has genuinely reckoned that is distinctly absent in the return of someone who simply missed what you provided. A quality of having been somewhere real during the absence, of having sat with something difficult rather than managed it into storage. You can feel this difference, not immediately in all cases, but relatively quickly if you are paying attention to the right thing rather than to the warmth of the return. The right thing to pay attention to is not what they say about the future, it is how they hold the past. Now I want to say something about the "don't let them come back" framing that deserves honest treatment. It is protective advice. It comes from a real and legitimate place, from the recognition that avoidant patterns are persistent, that the pull of the return is powerful, that people who have been significantly hurt by a dynamic are vulnerable to re-entering it precisely because it is familiar, and that re-entry without genuine change simply means paying the same emotional tax again from a potentially more depleted starting point. That concern is valid. The pattern repetition is real, and it is documented, and it does not require cynicism to acknowledge. Most returns to avoidant dynamics that occur without genuine structural change in the avoidant do reproduce the original pattern, with the added weight of a history that now includes having left and come back, which makes the next leaving harder to execute, and the staying in, the insufficient dynamic, more likely. So the protective instinct behind "don't let them come back" is grounded. It is worth taking seriously, and the more honest version of it is not a categorical prohibition, it is a demand. A specific and non-negotiable demand for the evidence that something has genuinely changed before the door opens. Not the demand delivered as an ultimatum in the warmth of reconnection. The private internal demand of someone who knows what they know and is not willing to trade that knowing for the relief of the return. What would need to be true? What would need to be demonstrable? Not promised, demonstrated. Over what period of time? Through what specific behaviors in what specific circumstances? Those are your terms, set internally, from your honest knowledge of what the dynamic cost and what your life requires now, and then held, not rigidly, not as a punishment, but as the actual standard of what you are worth, which is the standard of someone who does not re-enter what hurt them without sufficient evidence that re-entering would be different. There is one more thing worth saying about this, something about the timing of returns that matters practically. Avoidants tend to return at a specific moment in the other person's recovery, not always deliberately, but the timing is consistent enough to be worth naming. They tend to return when you have moved far enough away from the dynamic to have begun genuinely recovering, when the monitoring has quieted, when the self-editing has relaxed, when the ground you recovered has become solid enough that you are beginning to feel genuinely like yourself again, when the flatness of withdrawal has recalibrated into the capacity to find ordinary, consistent warmth genuinely nourishing. In other words, They tend to return when you have done enough healing to be the version of yourself that was worth returning to in the first place. This timing is not cynical strategy on their part. It is the natural output of the avoidance pattern. The distance they needed to feel safe creates the space in which your recovery occurs, and the recovery produces the qualities, the groundedness, the non-pressuring warmth, the genuine fullness of someone who is no longer organized around them, that the avoidance nervous system was always most drawn to, which means the return tends to arrive precisely when you are most genuinely yourself, and therefore most appealing to them, and also most capable of navigating the return with clarity, rather than from depletion. That convergence is worth recognizing for what it is, not as a reason to refuse the return, as information about the nature of the timing, about the fact that what drew them back is the recovery they were not present for, the work you did without them, the ground you built in their absence. That ground belongs to you. It was built by you, for you. Whatever you decide about the return, that ground is not available to be traded away, not for the warmth of the reconnection, not for the relief of being wanted, not for the specific comfort of someone who finally, visibly, wants what you always hoped they would want. The ground is yours. Whatever comes through the door, that stays. That is not negotiable. And as long as that is not negotiable, you have what you need to navigate whatever comes next, clearly, from your own honest center, without losing what you built in the silence they created. Part 3. Extension. There is something that happens in the gap between the avoidance return and your response to it that deserves more attention than it usually receives. The gap itself is information. How you feel in that gap, before you have decided anything, before the warmth of the reconnection has fully landed, or the protective instinct has fully activated, in the genuine and unmediated moment of simply knowing they have returned, that feeling is worth paying close attention to, not as the deciding factor, as honest data about where you actually are. Some people, encountering the return, feel primarily relief, the specific relief of having the missing confirmed, of the uncertainty resolved, of the connection that felt unfinished being offered another possibility of completion. That relief is real, and it is also worth examining, because relief organized around the return of someone whose absence was painful is not the same as clarity about whether the return is good for your life. It is the nervous system responding to the reduction of a specific and located discomfort. That is what relief is, and relief is not wisdom. Others feel something more complicated, something that contains both the genuine warmth of recognizing someone they know deeply and a more guarded quality, a part that does not immediately soften, that holds something, not coldly, with the specific steadiness of someone who has been somewhere real during the absence, and is not entirely willing to leave that place simply because the other person has returned from theirs. That steadiness is worth trusting. It is not hardness. It is the honest expression of ground that was genuinely built, of a self that was genuinely recovered, of someone who knows, in the body, what the dynamic cost, and is not yet persuaded that what has returned is different enough to justify reopening. The return tends to come with language, with the words the avoidant has finally found for what they feel, and what they recognize, and what they want to be different, and the language matters, but not in the way that the warmth of it suggests it matters. The language matters as a starting point, not as evidence, as the beginning of a conversation that would need to be sustained across time and circumstance, rather than as the conclusion of an accounting that can now be closed. What the avoidant says when they return is shaped by the peak of the regret, by the moment of maximum feeling, by the specific emotional intensity of having finally crossed the distance and made the reaching visible. And peak feeling produces peak language. The most articulate, the most vulnerable, the most apparently clear-eyed version of what they are capable of saying about themselves and the dynamic, and what they want to be true going forward. Peak language is not the same as sustained capacity. The person who can say the right things in the peak moment of return is not automatically the person who can do the right things in the ordinary, unglamorous, non-peak moments of sustained, intimate connection. The moments where the closeness builds to the level that previously triggered the withdrawal. The moments where the architecture reasserts itself, not because anything dramatic happened, but because the nervous system reached the threshold it has always reached and produced the response it has always produced. What happens in those moments is the actual information, not what was said at the door. I want to leave you with something concrete about how to navigate the return, if it comes, or when it comes. Do not decide immediately, in either direction. Not the immediate yes of someone whose relief at the return overrides the honest memory of what the dynamic cost. And not the immediate no of someone whose protection instinct closes the door before the actual evidence has been given the chance to be assessed. The immediate decision in either direction is made from feeling rather than from information. And this specific situation deserves to be decided from information. Give it time. Not indefinitely, not as another form of the conditional tense you have been living in, a specific and bounded amount of time in which the behavior, rather than the words, can begin to show you something, in which the ordinary circumstances of sustained connection can begin to reveal whether what returned is genuinely different or genuinely the same. You will know. Not from a single moment of revelation, from the accumulation of small and ordinary evidence across that time, from whether the patterns that previously ran automatically are running differently now, from whether the repair happens when the difficulty arrives, from whether the closeness is being allowed to build without the familiar management of it back to a safer distance. You will know, because you know this person, because you know this dynamic, because the time you spent understanding it, however costly, gave you a precision of perception that cannot be undone by the warmth of a return. Use that precision, not to punish, not to remain closed to what might genuinely be different, to see clearly, which is the most valuable thing you have developed through all of this, and the thing most worth keeping, whatever you decide.